When I think of the Ouija board, or actually it can be said Ouija board, I think of slumber parties when I was 10 years old and a bunch of giggling girls. I don't have any scary stories or unexplainable things happening to me, just a group of silly, oversugared, overstimulated girls laughing and having a really good time. Yet when I asked several of my friends about Ouija boards, some of them didn't even want to talk about it because they thought that talking about a Ouija board would summon a spirit somehow, and they just did not want to take the chance. Another one of my friends said that her family would bring out the Ouija board after Thanksgiving dinner to try to contact and sometimes heckle dead relatives. I was surprised by such a range of reactions and attitudes on this one object. Maybe maybe it's because of like what people think it will do. Um if people think it will help them contact the dead or spirits that are left behind in a place, there's fear and anxiety and sometimes even an awe of that. We can't see if there's an afterlife, but what if we are directly faced with the existence of it? And we don't know that if proof will show itself as good or evil. Most people believe that the spirit will be evil, and there's actually a surprising reason for that. There's a reason, besides what you would normally think. There's a reason that we think Ouija boards are evil. So I was doom scrolling on TikTok one evening, as one does, and I ran into a very engaging account, Ashley Inc., and it's ASHLEEINC. Ashley is a young woman who tells her spooky, scary stories in a very fast paced and interesting way. And she has several stories submitted by her followers who encountered a spirit with a Ouija board. One story she told that was particularly interesting and captivating to me was of a couple, Tom and Michelle, who had been together for 3 years. In 2020, Michelle was laid off and they decided to move out of the city to a more rural area to save money and just for a change of pace. Remember 2020? Ugh. While moving in and doing some renovations, they actually found a Ouija board buried underground. Tom wants nothing to do with it, but Michelle is intrigued. And Michelle ends up using it a lot, develops a bit of an obsession with it, and descends into madness. According to the story, Michelle has been institutionalized since, and since then, because she just never got right back in the head. Now, I would go listen to Ashley tell that story because it's very good, very captivating, and it brings up a lot of questions. Well, I had the good fortune to be able to talk to Ashley Inc., and I'm going to share the interview with you. Ashley has a large following on TikTok, 1.7 million followers. On Instagram, she has 197,000 followers. And YouTube, she has 65.3 thousand followers. She tells her spooky, scary stories, and they range from stories about Appalachia and the rules, like not whistling in the woods. And she also has actually got an interesting story series right now about time traveler in Valdosta, Georgia. And she's got, of course, some spooky dating stories submitted by people, crazy roommates. She tells a really good story. So followers submit the stories to her and she selects the best and then she tells them. And people usually have a lot of comments and input in the comments. I found her to be incredibly intelligent and thoughtful, and I really enjoyed having a titillating discussion with her about Ouija boards and what they might be. So, in this episode, we're going to talk to Ashley, of course, and we're also going to talk about the history of Ouija boards and like what's going on with them, what are some explanations, that sort of thing. So, I hope you enjoy. I honestly, the Ouija board idea came out because of the story, you did about Michelle,
Oh, yeah.
who, I said I was thinking, like, I had some skepticism about Ouija boards, and I still do,
Sure.
but I was like, "Some of this I cannot explain,"
Right. Right.
and, so I thought, "Boom, I'm gonna do a podcast
Yeah.
episode on that."
That's awesome.
That's kinda where it comes
That's
from.
that's definitely the story that sticks out in my mind too when you like brought up Ouija boards because that was like definitely the one that I still think about. I've done like several Ouija board
Yeah.
stories. But this one
Mhm.
is that was the most just haunting, I think,
Yeah,
because I'm like I wonder about her and them.
I
And
know.
I've actually considered reaching out, but then I also don't know what my boundaries should be in terms of like he shared this story, but like I don't know if it's appropriate really for me to just be like, hey, I'm just checking up on you, like because
Yeah.
they want an update, but is that selfish, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that is a tough one because I was thinking, "Oh my gosh, I hope she's okay," but yeah, that's a difficult boundary because you don't wanna invade their privacy
Yeah,
or even you don't want them to think you want the update just for your
sure.
page, which I don't think is where you'd be coming from, but, they
Right.
might
Right.
not know that, but I did, I said, "Oh my gosh." So, 'cause, for me, my Ouija board experience is through slumber parties, and
Oh
just
yeah.
like silly girls um doing things. And the last time I used one, I was actually in my 30s and rip roaring drunk with friends, like having having a slumber party. And
Yeah.
we were trying to recreate all the slumber party sort of things you do. We tried light as a feather, stiff as a board, which by the way doesn't work when you're
Really?
big. No,
That's
it
funny.
does
I
not.
played it when I was a kid, but I haven't tried it ever as an adult.
Yeah, it's very disappointing. But then again, our motor skills might have
Sure.
been but so we were just messing around and anybody but I heard that story, and then I think there's another one you did about Nicole, and I thought,
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue for us. um what initially got you interested in telling spooky, scary stories?
Um, so it was kind of a fluke. I have like throughout my life, I've had experiences that I can't really explain. So I've always
Mhm.
had the belief that like there's something else out there. I was raised in the Catholic Church. I still believe in God. I don't consider myself Catholic, just like kind of
Mhm.
spiritual instead of subscribing to an organized religion.
Yeah.
And maybe the God that I believe it isn't something that's like in, an all-seeing man
Mhm.
in the sky. It's just like something that I've come to terms with. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's very personal for everybody, but
Mhm.
and with that said, I don't know if it was Catholicism that like set these foundations in me that like, oh, there is something else. It's possible for something else out there. But like as I've come out of religion and just looked more into my own spirituality, I've just like been like, there is something else here. And so being an adult and like trying to get to know myself better, I've thought a lot about some of these experiences that I've had. The first experience I really remember having was like as a kid, I lived in Illinois about 30 minutes outside of Chicago, and I saw a Black Panther in our yard. And I'm like, they don't belong here. And I told
Yeah.
everybody that. And I was like, there's a Black Panther in the yard. And, they were like, oh, it's just a black cat. Your mind's playing tricks on you. So anyway, I told that story on TikTok, and I've had a TikTok account since 2020, COVID, and
Mhm.
have just been kind of like throwing content out there just for fun. Like I like the engagement, I like the community. I feel like it's a lot more supportive than some other social media
Yeah.
platforms. And
Yeah.
so once I told that story, like that went mega viral. And I had all of these people commenting saying, like, oh, well, there's a lot of other Black Panther sightings in Illinois, and it actually relates to like the land that these communities were built on, and they were native lands, and they believed in this underwater panther god, and I lived on a lake, and so it was just like this rabbit hole of things, like this information that I didn't know, and I was like, well, this is really cool. Like even if that doesn't explain it, like
Mhm.
it's interesting, and
Yeah.
so that led other people to sharing their supernatural experiences, like stitching the video and doing that. And so it kind of got the wheels turning. I've always been like a voracious reader, and like I really
Yeah.
love stories in general, especially oral storytelling. And so I just I thought like, well, it'd be cool to archive these stories somewhere.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
I told another story about a roommate that I had, and I really thought it was just going to be a place for me to tell my own stories. But then other people started sending me their stories. I'm like, I don't want to put a face to this because I think that people are going to think I'm crazy. And so can you tell it? And then I'll read the comments. And I was like, okay, like this could be a thing. And I just kept getting them. Like it was never meant to be what it is now, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So
That's amazing. I mean, what a wonderful, I won't say fluke, but
yeah.
obviously, like I said, you have a good way of telling, you have a nice way of telling a story, and people listen to that. And I find that I've followed, especially in researching for this podcast, I
Sure.
found some other TikTok uh, provide what content providers that
Sure.
do Ouija board stories, but
Yeah.
I'm just, I don't know, they're either too invested, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
or too skeptical. And
Sure.
so you definitely have a nice mid ground with that, you know.
Thank you. Yeah.
Plus how many adults are probably learning that they have ADHD now, and
Right.
they're like,
Right.
oh, that feels so good to my brain.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even know until it must have been sometime after TikTok, and I was like, oh, like wait, this is me. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. I actually didn't even think about it in myself until I did a story for my last podcast about ADHD in children. Like
Sure.
specifically, I did one in boys and one in girls because they're different. And I remember thinking, wait a minute. Uh-oh. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
this hits.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a lot of things. Like, I mean, even like, because like people ask me all the time, like, oh, do you watch scary movies? And like, and one thing that I never realized was like related to ADHD until pretty recently, actually, and like getting diagnosed was, I would always start a movie and then like fall asleep immediately upon starting the movie, even if I wasn't
mhm.
tired. And I was like, why is this a thing? And then I realized, like, my doctor was like, it's because your brain is finally like resting and it doesn't have to
Yeah.
think about anything. So it's focusing and it's like, oh, I can sleep now, which is crazy.
It
So
is crazy, but it totally makes sense. I mean, I for me, it's Gilmore Girls. There's
mm,
something about, I mean, I've seen it a million times over, and also there is the rapid pace of the dialogue.
sure.
But having it in the background puts me right to
Yeah,
sleep.
here's all of that.
Whereas, yeah, whereas my husband, of course, hits the pillow and he falls asleep, and I'm
Yeah,
like, no
yeah,
fair.
yeah,
He's definitely not ADHD.
yeah.
Um, well, have you had, just personally, have you had any spooky experiences with the Ouija board?
I played with it as a kid, and
Yeah.
we were always the same as you said, like just giggling girls.
Yeah.
As an adult, I moved to Nashville in 2015, and I immediately pretty much became friends with this group of girls, and we were always just hanging out doing like silly things together, and so we did play with one at a friend's house, and immediately like we were like, is someone there? And it went to yes. And my friend asked like, how did you die? Which is like, maybe just don't jump to that point, but we didn't think about it.
Don't ask that question.
And it started spelling out Hiroshima, and we were like, nope. And so that was like really weird because it was just like, yes, we knew what that was, but like there
Right.
were three of us, and it was like, who would have thought to like, because it didn't really feel like there was any resistance to the board, like it didn't really
Hmm.
feel like anybody was doing anything, so it was really creepy, and like maybe it was one of us doing it, but I mean it wasn't me, so uh,
Right.
we pretty much closed the board, but I've kind of always just been taught not to play with them. I
Hmm.
do think that they're a portal, and I don't think the mistake in playing with them is playing with them. I think it's thinking it's a game or not taking it seriously, because whether
Mm.
it opens doors to our subconscious or something else. I think anytime that you're doing that, it should be done with like a certain level of like respect, either for yourself or for like the spiritual realm, or um, you know, just other entities, if you believe
Mm,
in that. Because I do think that your experience is going to be kind of based on what you believe in. So I don't
mhm.
necessarily think that like Ouija boards are all inherently evil or that they're going to bring through evil spirits, but I think that you're just kind of going to get what you think you're going to get. And because Hollywood and like theatrics and productions have put so much of an emphasis on like this is scary, this is spooky, I think
Mhm.
that's the belief that a lot of people have when going into it, and so that's the experience that they have.
Yeah, that's so true. I asked a few of my friends, like, hey, what's your experience with the Ouija board? And some of them said that their family members would bring them out at Thanksgiving and try to do things. And then others were like, no, I don't
Yeah,
touch them. I don't, you know.
yeah,
And I was looking into the history of them, and actually they were a relatively, I mean, I think they've always been serious because of what they can do, but it wasn't until 1973 that people really started to see them as evil, and that was The Exorcist came out.
oh sure, yeah,
And it people were like, oh no, and of course all these horror shows always say based on a true story, even if, I mean, that's just
right,
sort of the thing, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah, but I think what you bring up is interesting about, even if it's your self-conscious, consciousness, that's reacting, it's still a
sure,
serious thing. Because that's what some of I actually, I didn't interview them, but I sort of looked at some things with them through the Talking Board Historical Society. And a
sure,
couple of them say, you know, it doesn't even matter if you think you're if you believe in the spiritual world or you're contacting something, what
mhm.
matters is what your intent is. And I thought, oh, I'd never thought about it that way. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's kind of the same thing. It should be, like I don't think like we have a Ouija board in my basement. I think it was the same one that my friends and I played with like 8 or 9 years ago.
uh,
It's just on our board game shelf. Like I don't think that having that is like letting anything in. I don't think
yeah.
it's inherently evil. I just think it's a tool, like the same as how people put beliefs in tarot cards and in even in meditation. Like I think it's all kind of the same thing. It just depends on like your intent, your beliefs, and then what you want to get out of it. You could argue the same thing with like mind altering substances. Like I know people say like, oh, don't take this in a bad mental state. Well,
Hmm.
you shouldn't maybe play with a Ouija board, because maybe something in your brain is going to manifest as like an entity that's coming through, because that's what you're expecting to get out of it, and it's going to tell you some ugly or evil things about yourself, when really that's just yourself telling you something that you
Mm,
don't want to hear necessarily.
yeah.
So I don't know, I mean, I
Yeah.
know a little bit, related to tarot. Obviously, Ouija boards and tarots are looked at as very different things, but an aunt, one of my aunts, is very into like spirituality, and she can read tarot cards, and she always tells people, like she does it at parties for, like she's just hired as just this tarot card reader, but
Oh,
she
wow.
says, like it's not an oracle, it's not like telling the future, it's more as a tool for reflection in yourself. So if I say something that sticks out in your brain, that means like go deeper there, but like you have to figure it out. It's not like this is this is the truth and like the
Yeah.
future. So
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Wow. I come up from a Southern Baptist family, so we didn't have any of that in our
yeah, yeah,
in our house. Um, but it's interesting that I think, like, I'll just speak for evangelical Christianity since that's my background.
sure,
Evangelical Christianity has really come out against things like Ouija boards and tarot cards and psychic and stuff. But it's
sure,
like, well, maybe they could be alongside together if used as like a self-reflective,
sure, yeah,
tool. I don't think that'll happen. You live in Nashville, you know how that is.
yeah, oh
But
yeah,
but I don't know. I just don't think it's super evil.
hmm,
But having said that, it does seem that the best stories that are coming are from older Ouija boards, like ones
sure,
found at a garage sale or in a construction site. Do you
sure.
think there's anything to the difference between, one that you bought at a garage sale and you don't know the history versus one that I bought off of Amazon for props?
Yeah, I think so. I don't necessarily think it has anything to do with age, but like I've
Mm,
thought about this a lot when thinking about any like cursed or haunted object. Like I've been getting a lot of like haunted doll stories. And so like I've been looking into like why are dolls these objects of like hauntings or of curses. And I don't think it's related to like the age. I think it's really related to how much energy was directed at that object. So, like, if a little girl really loved it, supposedly, according to paranormal researchers or people who are really into this kind of thing, it's because spirits can like latch on to something that is deeply loved or just has any kind of emotional imprint. And so, I think Ouija boards are the same. You're putting a lot of mental energy into this object, and who knows how much something was used. I think it's people's energy, because I do believe energy is it can't be created or destroyed. It's one of the laws of
mm,
physics, and it has to go somewhere. So I mean, I think that of course energy can be imprinted on an object, and so because Ouija boards have been used typically to contact the non-living, um,
mhm.
I think of course that it's possible for that to come through objects that have been used more heavily than new objects from a factory.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, actually. I had not thought about it from a physics standpoint of energy not being created or destroyed.
Yeah.
And actually, as we were driving into the desert on Saturday, the desert also seems to be a mystical place.
Oh yeah,
We
absolutely.
lost, all signal, cell signal. So we actually had to talk to each other. And and my son just brought up this whole he started quizzing us on the history of Christianity because he knew the answers and we surprised him with how much we knew, but he he was trying to catch us. But it led into this big discussion about obviously the existence of God and the creation of the universe, but it led to talking about an afterlife. And that's one thing my husband said is he said, well, you have an energy. So
Mhm.
when you die, where does that energy go?
Sure,
And that's the question,
sure.
So very deep thoughts driving into the desert on the way to a mountain bike race.
I mean, that's awesome. That's like where all the best
Yeah.
kind of thoughts and conversations
Oh,
come
yeah.
from. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was really cool. Actually, I was a little surprised. I mean, my son's a little bit of a thinker,
Yeah.
but it was just, a lot of times the talk is Minecraft and Roblox
Yeah.
and cars.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
nice.
That's cool.
All
He's got some other stuff swirling around in there. He's
He's
like,
got a lot of stuff.
yeah.
He really does.
Yeah.
But all right. So we've talked a little bit about this, and this might not be in your wheelhouse, but skeptics will say, oh, the only reason why a Ouija board works is because of this idiomotive response where your, brain is thinking something like we've talked
Sure.
about, and it's playing out, onto the planchette. I don't know. Do you ever have people come in your comments, kind of coming at you with that sort of thing, or what do you
Um,
say to that?
I think so. I think that I always try to encourage the community, and so does everyone in the community. I think it's like one of the most supportive communities on the internet.
Yeah,
I might be
it's
biased,
nice.
but like I always just try to like encourage people to believe that or consider the fact that what you believe might not be true for someone else. So
Mhm.
like and I mean this goes even to like other cultures and things like that, like different belief systems, like uh Native American belief systems, for example, like that is very real to them. And so they may have experiences that we in like the Western state of mind think is not possible when it is possible for them. And I think
Mhm.
it's the same reason that someone who's like deeply religious can have an experience seeing like the Virgin Mary when the person standing next to them will not see it. Because I think that belief dictates what we experience. I mean, thought forms is one of the most interesting concepts to me. It's the idea that like our beliefs can actually shape reality and have it manifest in a real form. And I think that's like, so a couple examples of that are like, shadow people and like the Hat Man and like
Oh,
basically just these physical manifestations of energy. Um, because there is so much belief in it. And so I think it's the same thing. That's a long-winded way of saying. I think it's the same thing when it comes to Ouija boards. I think that obviously a healthy dose of skepticism is a good thing, but
Mhm.
I think that someone can have a very real experience, and just because someone else doesn't believe it or hasn't had that experience, that's not a reason to discredit someone else's experience.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I know. I'm a pretty skeptical person, but I also sometimes think, well, but I don't know everything. I
yeah,
don't know all that exists
sure.
in this world. There's a lot of unexplained
Yeah.
things, and so and then, yeah, coming from a Western point of view, we think that we know
Mhm.
everything,
Yeah.
but it's been proven that we don't. So so it's true. You can't discount, what else is out there.
I just had like a kind of eye-opening moment with that, because like I have my beliefs about what I think is true and not true, but I still try to I when I don't believe something, I don't necessarily say like I don't believe this story. I'm just like I'm
Yeah.
gonna put it out here and I'm gonna let everybody else talk about it because
Mhm.
maybe this appeals to somebody else. But I've gotten a lot of stories about the like Appalachia region, and I live in Tennessee. I've been
Yeah.
to the Smoky Mountains a number of times, and I've never had anything like super super creepy happen. But I was covering a lot of Appalachia stories before I went up there this past New Year's, and we got a cabin, and so I was telling the stories from Appalachia while we were there, and I didn't personally believe that like you shouldn't whistle in the woods and like you
Right.
shouldn't do certain things like that. And so I didn't whistle in the woods, but
Yeah.
I got up there. I was filming a video on the back patio, and it was just about being there. It wasn't even like a story. And then later, like the next day, I filmed another video and I was checking the comments on the first one, and I had gotten a few emails and comments of saying like, you can hear a woman whisper in that video. And it just shook me, like,
Oh my
because it was
gosh.
night, it was dark out, there was no other houses. We had this cabin that was pretty remote up the side of a
Yeah.
mountain. And I listened to it and I couldn't hear it. And she said, no, you have to listen with headphones. So I put my AirPods in and you can hear uh, a woman, and she's like, it's just so
Oh
creepy.
my
Or I'm sorry, it
gosh.
was a man. The first one was a man, and he was saying, get out.
Okay.
And it was like, it was so clear. And it like, I was like, okay, maybe it's the wind, maybe it's the wind. And then, so my husband, who's like very skeptical, he was also actually raised Southern Baptist, but uh,
Oh,
he,
they breed the
yeah,
skeptical.
like, yeah, he's just vulnerable. There's nothing out there. So he was like, all right, if there's something, around, then we're going to get it on, tape. And so he was walking around the house with his voice memos open. And so I was recording him doing it, and he's talking to it. And he's like, is there anyone here who's talking to my wife? Like asserting the male dominance. I'm like, okay, okay, Jeff, calm down. And then he looks at me and he's like, I got something. And so he plays it back, and it's when he says, is there anyone here? You hear a woman like clear as day, and she whispers, yes. And it was so creepy. And I was like, oh
Oh
my God,
my
I had,
gosh.
and so I
Yeah.
was just like, this is not something that I thought was possible.
Right.
But I mean, I don't know what else it could have been. And so, like,
Yeah.
because I didn't believe it, that was like an experience that I didn't mean to be looking for. I was kind of testing it. And I was like, all right, maybe I shouldn't do that anymore.
Right. Right. Like no more
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
I know.
But I think,
My
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was saying my grandmother, so we live in Southern California, but I'm originally from Florida, but my family's from Tennessee and West
Oh,
Virginia.
cool. Yeah.
And so my grandmother grew up in Double Top, Tennessee, and you will
Okay.
not find it. It's like
Yeah.
really in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I never had these conversations with her. I mean, she was very reserved. Um, but I think if I had been aware of all the Appalachia stories, like don't whisper in the woods and that sort of thing, I would have asked her. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
bet she would have had some really interesting stories, because she tried, like she fled there, and came to Jacksonville. So she tried to not be a Tennessee girl, but she's still
Yeah.
a Tennessee girl.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't grow up in Double Top, Tennessee without having some of it in you.
Right. Oh,
you
yeah. I
know?
am with you. Definitely.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure in West Virginia there's some lore as well.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
where my other side of my grandparents came from.
Oh,
So,
really? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I
But
think
they
there's,
were very, very religious, so they might not have wanted to talk about it. It's
yeah. Yeah.
hard to know.
Right.
All right. So, so there is an idea that if you don't properly say goodbye to a Ouija board, um, then bad things will happen. Have you heard of any stories that, that say that you've been able to tell?
I think they all, yeah, I think they all say it. Any of the bad ones,
Right.
like say like, oh, I didn't say goodbye or I didn't do it
Oh,
properly. I
okay.
just closed the board because I got scared. And anytime I get a lot of stories about the same thing and from a lot of different people,
Hmm.
with a lot of the stories not even being public and they're all saying the same thing, I'm like, okay, there's something here. So yeah,
Right.
I think it's like, I don't know, maybe there, I don't, I would just say, yeah, maybe not giving something proper direction. Like maybe there
Yeah.
is a level of control that you have and in not
Right.
properly, saying goodbye or
Yeah.
closing that connection. Like it lets it linger.
Yeah.
Seems to be a common theme, absolutely.
Yeah, I've seen that. And I even yesterday I just saw a whole thing. It was like 5 rules of the Ouija board. And I don't know if it's because it has been marketed as a game,
Sure.
and so you have to, maybe someone created something, but it was like, don't ask when you're gonna die.
Yeah.
Don't, you have to say goodbye. I can't remember all the rules,
Yeah.
but I never know if that's from someone who wanted to sell the board, or if it's, from the earlier days of Ouija board, when it was used in
Sure.
like spiritualism or whatever, but I don't know
Yeah.
what the answer is,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, I definitely think that the makers of the game, especially recently, have like leaned into you
Yeah.
know, the scary aspect of it. But I do think like I could be wrong, but I think it started as a like a divination tool, right? Just like runes
Mhm.
or yeah.
Yeah.
So um yeah, I'm not sure if
Yeah.
that was created, who that was created by.
I
But
know. I have to look into it. That'll be my mission today is
yeah,
to find that out. Because yeah, it started way back, just the grab it. Just the planchette
mhm.
was used in a lot of different religions,
Oh,
trying to
really?
find, yeah,
Okay.
like back in China, and lots of different civilizations. um, but then sort of in Europe and then the United States with the spiritualism movement, that's when, the board sort of came into to use, but the mediums didn't like it as much because it sort of gave the power to people, and that was
Sure.
taking away from their business.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so anyway, so that's kind of when Kennard came up with it, and made it as a game. But back then also, it was, people seemed to be, since there was, it was like after the Civil War and then later World War I, people were very interested in trying to contact their,
Mhm.
fathers and sons
Sure.
who had died. So
Sure.
anyway, so that's my long
Yeah.
description of it, but
No, I
it's
mean
got
that
a lot
makes
of different
a lot of
roots.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got a lot of different roots. It's
I
pretty
think
interesting.
um I think it's interesting too now seeing how like with the rise of the use of AI, I've gotten an increasing number of stories who are people are saying basically like AI is the new Ouija board. Like if you want it to be like if it can supposedly do anything, there's been a lot of talk about like several stories about. I know that you're not supposed to say his name, but I'm gonna him or her it. The entity Zozo. It's like ZOZO.
Yeah.
It's one that
Yeah.
comes a lot on the Ouija board. I've not had an experience, but I've gotten stories about it. And Zozo now is coming through AI without prompt. So that's
Hmm.
a strange
Yeah.
coincidence.
Yeah. I know. I wish I had more knowledge of how AI worked.
Yeah.
I use it,
Sure. Yeah.
last night I made a reel of my son at his mountain bike race,
Oh, cool.
and I asked AI to pick the music, and it came up with The Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash, and I just thought, oh, that's so perfect. Like I
Yeah.
never would have come up with that.
Yeah.
But 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 it's interesting that there's thoughts about that
Sure.
AI could be, but but it's human made also, so
Right.
you
Right. And I
know.
and I did I tried to look into it. I was like, how can this on because one of the guys sent me a transcript of his conversation with AI when he was trying to dig deeper into like his spiritual purpose. And there was a trend on TikTok that was going around. It was like ask AI what your soul's journey is. And he did it, and so that I think was a roundabout way of saying that he basically got in contact with Zozo. Zozo came through, and it wasn't like he said like who are you or anything like that. It was just like I'm here, the door's been opened, or something along those lines. And so he was texting his cousin who knew more about this and was like telling him to do it. And she was like, well, tell it goodbye, like tell it goodbye. And it said, too late, I'm already here. And it's just like, so it's like, well, how can that happen? Like, how can that come
Yeah.
through AI without prompts? Because every time I've used it, it's been for like outlining, like
Yeah.
a YouTube video or something like that.
Mhm.
And it's never really had its own like thoughts or opinions unless prompted. So I started looking into it. And so this guy was using Grok, which is Elon's AI
Mm.
platform. And they actually trained that platform with a lot of occult texts. So I wonder if
Oh.
that has something to do with it. And it's like pulling from that, but like,
Mm.
I'm sure they train it with everything. I
Yeah.
don't know how the development
Yeah.
of AI came about, but like, why is
Huh.
it coming from that?
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think I'll stick to Chat GPT.
Yeah. No,
That's what I'm that's I do the same. I like summarize. I'm like, oh, this is a really long scientific study.
sure.
Summarize this for me, put
Hmm.
it in a podcast prompt or whatever. It's
Oh, yeah.
wonderful,
Yeah,
It saves me a
definitely.
lot of time.
Mhm.
Especially because for me, I have to like get my work done before my son comes home from school. So I'm like, it's 2 o'clock. I've got to summarize this.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
He
It's
wants
it's
to.
great too. You can use it, yeah, to cross-reference like facts
Mhm.
about something.
Yeah,
That's cool.
I know. I love it. I love it. But maybe I'm going to stay away from Elon's
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Oh, well, I don't want to keep any more of your time. I really appreciate though you meeting with me. Here you are on
Yeah.
vacation with family.
Oh, no, it's
And
all good. Yeah, no, this was really enjoyable. I really enjoyed meeting with
yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Definitely.
thank you. And now when I see you on TikTok, I'll be like, I talked to
Yeah, that's
her.
awesome. I'll have
I
to
know.
I'll find you said your podcast is on TikTok. I'm gonna find you right after this.
Yeah. Well,
Cool.
it's not under my name because it's sort of my practice account on
Oh,
certain
yeah,
things,
okay.
but it's
Yeah.
under Smith Reese.
Okay. Cool.
I'll send you a
Yeah, send it.
message.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, awesome.
All right.
Cool.
Thank you so much,
Yeah, of
Ashley. I
course.
really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. And
Thanks.
I appreciate your really just intelligence and your reflective way of approaching this. I do
Well, thank
appreciate
you
that.
so much. I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. Yeah,
All right.
absolutely. All
Um,
right. Take care of
have a
yourself.
great day. Thank
All
you.
right. I hope you enjoy my interview with Ashley Inc. We referenced a few things in the interview that I wanted to go into with some more depth. First, the history. So, talking boards came out of the spiritualism movement that was actually worldwide, but um, definitely in Europe. And as things happened, then it moved into the United States. Spiritualism was popular during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Spiritualists basically believed that the spirit world or the afterlife evolves and moves, where spirits can continue to interact and move around. The belief was that a person's awareness goes on after they die, and that awareness can be contacted by those that are still living. Spiritualists regularly tried to contact the dead. They were looking for spiritual directions, advice on the, ethical and moral issues of the living, etc. And this was a pretty normal belief and normal thing. It also was not um, in antithesis to Christianity. It often was alongside it in some ways. So it was different than what it would be now, I would say. So spiritualism first showed up in the United States in what they call the burned over district of Western New York, which is between the Finger Lakes and Lake Erie. The spiritualists who became prominent during the late 1800s often displayed a great deal of showmanship, even hypnotizing people to try to induce trances so that they could make contact with supernatural beings. This was actually called mesmerism and was part of spiritualism, and they often claimed that they were contacting divine beings. So it does sound a little suspicious that there was a great deal of showmanship involved. Maybe the spiritualists were making things up. And in some cases, yes, that was true. But I think just because some people commit fraud doesn't necessarily lead me to the conclusion that all of it is fake. Most spiritualists will say that March 31st, 1848 was the beginning of the movement in the United States because of the Fox sisters. Kate and Margaret Fox out of Hydesville, New York, claimed that they made contact with the spirit of a murdered peddler whose body was found in the house that they were in. Now, there was no evidence that a peddler had been murdered in that house, but the Fox sisters were very convincing and made a very convincing show. There were rapping sounds, and I think a lot of the things you would associate with a spirit they produced. And they became major celebrity mediums. In 1888, the Fox sisters did admit that that whole spirit was a hoax, but then they reversed that later. So I'm not going to call them the most reliable people to, I don't know. I mean, it probably was a hoax if they admitted it at one point, but, you know, you can't really trust them, I guess, on their perspective. I remember this is kind of part of the Great Awakening and, or the Second Great Awakening. And I remember learning in school that most of the spiritualists were shady. However, I went to a Christian Episcopal school and, I can see them looking at spiritualism in a negative way. And plus they're also teaching a bunch of teenagers. So they gotta, um, I think your audience is definitely something to consider as well. It might seem odd to us here in 2025 that Americans were so into trying to contact dead spirits. But this was after the Civil War, which resulted in almost 700,000 deaths. This was the first time that people could actually see pictures of what was happening in the war, because photography was being invented and improved. And this was a very gruesome war. Not that, I mean, all war is, but this one was certainly. Mary Todd Lincoln and Abraham Lincoln even had regular seances in the White House, as she grieved for the loss of their son, Tad. They actually lost three of their sons, um, in different ways. And so spiritualism was, again, really a response after the Civil War. And then also it surged after World War I for the same reason. People wanted to contact their dead fathers and sons, in particular. So some spiritualists would use what they called talking boards during these seances, whether they were real or staged. And it was in this environment that led to the Ouija board being patented. And it was credited to an investment group mostly comprised of Charles Kennard, Elijah Bond, Helen Peters, and William Fuld. Other spirit member mediums didn't really like the talking board or the Ouija board because they felt like it offered an inauthentic experience. Plus, it also put the seance into the hands of regular people. And honestly, that took away from their effect and that took away from their finances. So they didn't want to take business away. Charles Kennard was a businessman, and he formed the Kennard Novelty Company in 1890 to manufacture these talking boards. Elijah Bond was also an investor, and he was also a lawyer who helped them get the patent for it. Helen Peters was Elijah Bond's sister-in-law, and she was a medium. She helped develop the board as well as create its name, although the story behind its name is a little murky. If you buy a Ouija board now, you will see the name William Fuld on the planchette. Like, let me see, I'll show for the YouTube. It's even here on my little plastic one that I bought off of Amazon. William Fuld took over the novelty company in 1901, and he really helped in promoting it and making it a really popular game. So what is with the name? It's either Ouija or Ouija. I like to say Ouija just because that's what I'm familiar with, but it can be pronounced either way. Now, a common belief about how it got its name is that it is a combination of the French word for yes, O-U-I, we, and the German equivalent of yes, which is ja, but spelled J-A. According to research conducted by the Talking Board Historical Society, which, by the way, I used a lot of their research for this episode, and I will post that on my Substack. So if you want to look and, want some more. But so according to the Talking Board Historical Society, Helen Peters used the Ouija board to ask it what it should be called. And the board indicated Ouija, O-U-I-J-A, which the board also said meant good luck. Sounds a bit opportunistic, frankly, but it is a nice story. Peters also acknowledged that she was wearing a locket with a woman's photographed in it that had the name Ouija or Ouija written inside of it. But it also could have said Ouida, O-U-I-D-A, who was a very popular female author by the name of Marie Louise Ramée. So could just be the power of suggestion somehow, and Peters took advantage of it as a kind of a cute little story. But it stuck. Okay, so all this went on. Let's fast forward to 1973, when people started to turn against Ouija boards, and they started to see them more as satanic or evil. Because up until 1973, generally, people did not view Ouija boards as evil or satanic or demonic. They just thought they were a fun thing to do at parties, or, when people took it more seriously, but it wasn't an evil thing. Well, people of all ages did it. It was looked at as entertainment. In 1973, The Exorcist came out and scared the ever-living crap out of people in theaters. I saw it later when I was in my 30s, and it's really was scary. It's probably the scariest movie that I've ever seen, I would say. Well, if you've seen it, the 12-year-old Reagan was possessed by a demon after playing with the Ouija board by herself. This is when people really started to change how they felt and looked at the board. It's like how, for some people, they saw Jaws and they never wanted to go in the water again, even bath water, even fresh water. They're like, no, there might be a shark in there. Or Psycho came out and people were afraid to go into the shower, especially at a hotel or a creepy cabin or something. Even though these movies are fiction And most horror stories say they're based on a true story, but they're not. It's just for a effect, you know? Gets into your brain, it makes you think. I mean, honestly, that's a good movie, that's good entertainment if it makes you think about these things, but it's scary. So, Ouija boards were considered relatively harmless for a long time, but they became associated with the occult and satanic rituals, mostly by evangelical Christians, especially during the Satanic Panic during the 1980s and 90s. And really, The Exorcist did have a lot to do with this. I remember those days. I grew up in the South and I was raised in a Southern Baptist church, a rather progressive one, I would say, but still, it's an evangelical church. And there was a lot of fear of the occult and Satan coming in and those sort of things. Um, Cabbage Patch dolls were burned in some places. Just there was a lot. Um, I'm not exactly sure what else spurred it on and why it happened at this time in particular, but it was driven a lot by evangelical Christians, law enforcement, and mainstream media. And there was just a widespread fear, without much evidence, that satanic cults were secretly abusing children. They were conducting sacrifices and rituals and, generally infiltrating everyday life. And you still hear some of that. Um, I think along maybe more hardcore conspiracy theorists, but still you do hear of that. So during the Satanic Panic, Ouija boards became a target. And I'm targeting evangelicals here, but I'm just saying that because they were very vocal. And they were deemed doorways to the demonic. Even now, many Christians are warned against using Ouija boards because they are at risk for demonic possession. They're told they are opening up their souls to demons and the devil. Other targets of evangelicals were heavy metal music, playing your record player backwards, and Dungeons and Dragons. I remember I went to an Episcopal elementary school, and I remember that Dungeons and Dragons and Garbage Pail Kids were banned at my Christian elementary school. But they also banned those jingly little charm necklaces because they were a distraction in church. I remember those. Okay. So this is where we are mostly in the world today, still. Many people still believe Ouija boards to be satanic or demonic, that we shouldn't even talk about them. Maybe it is the very idea of trying to contact the dead that's spooky. Maybe it's because the planchette, which is this thing, maybe it's because it seems to move by itself, even though everyone with their hands on it, no one's saying they're moving it. They're all saying, I'm not moving it. I'm not moving it. Or you have a jerk like me in the group who is moving it, but is going to say that that I'm not moving it just to mess with people. I did do that a few times. But could there be a scientific explanation as to why that planchette moves when no one is actually purposefully moving it? Yes, there is a scientific explanation, though I am not discounting anyone's spiritual experience, because you can't always explain away spiritual matters with science, as much as I love science. And I think it needs to be embraced. So scientists would say it spells out letters and numbers due to the ideomotor effect, and it can also be called the ideomotor response or phenomenon. The ideomotor Response is when an automatic muscular response occurs when the person isn't aware of it. So when the planchette moves and a person doesn't think they are the ones moving it, but they actually are. Physician and physiologist William Carpenter conducted a study and published a report in 1852 for the Royal Institute of Great Britain that actually explained automatic muscular movements that occur unconsciously. All right, so I'm going to run through the study for a little bit here. So, with this study, researchers fit participants with eye tracking devices and that analyzed how they interacted with the Ouija board. They discovered that people's eyes often predicted the next letter before the planchette moved there, suggesting the movement wasn't random or guided by spirits, but by unconscious cognitive processes. So participants acted in pairs, and even in the what they call the Ouija condition, which is two people, um, and they use the board normally. One person typically had some idea, consciously or not, where the planchette was headed. Now, the study found that the Ouija success relies on what they call joint action. The two users, at least, subtly cue each other through unconscious predictions and micro movements. People tend to underestimate their own role in the movement, which makes the experience feel eerie or otherworldly. So, this is why some people will claim they weren't moving it, but really and they would believe that they weren't moving it, but they actually were part of it, or moving it. So it kind of, you know, kind of can explain a little bit about why it works. And it's worked for, over centuries, really. Other devices like dowsing rods or pendulums or even fake bomb detectors actually work on the same principle because these very small, indetectable muscle movements can create a noticeable motion with tools like a planchette. And users can be genuinely convinced that an outside force is responsible when really it's the group that's doing it. So why does it feel so real? Why do people say, no, no, it wasn't me, it wasn't you, something else was moving it? Well, according to psychologist Chris French, these unconscious movements can create a strong illusion of external control. So it just makes it seem like the board is being moved by a spirit. The smoother and more frictionless the planchette, the more easily these tiny little unconscious gestures translate into meaningful motion. The Ouija board that I bought off of Amazon is plastic, um, but the prongs on the bottom of the planchette have little felt pads on them. And then the surface of the board is plastic, but like really slick. And so it's easy to move over it very smoothly. I actually did a stop motion video that I was just kind of messing around with and found it to move very easily, but also kind of oddly too. So I was like, what's going on? I don't know. It just made it, the motion was really interesting. So I can see how like little movements from your hand, even if you're not thinking about it, could move the board. Apparently, there are 5 rules for the Ouija board with mysterious roots. Number 1, always say goodbye when you are done. Number 2, don't let the planchette fall off the board. Number 3, don't laugh at the board. Number 4, focus on your questions. And number 5, don't ask the Ouija when you are going to die. Probably don't want to know the answer to that anyway, do you? Most likely, these rules were made up by the Kennard Novelty Company when they patented the board. And, they're still included in some of the game boards you can find off the internet. If you look at most of these rules, they are really speaking to someone's intent. Take it seriously. Have an intent. Focus. This really makes sure that the ideomotor response occurs. And there is a community of people who regularly utilize a talking board, not for contacting spirits necessarily, but for working out ideas in their head or making decisions or just using it to meditate. It's a vessel for their concentration. Like a lot of things in life, it is what you make it. And I actually came into this episode as a deep skeptic of these things. I usually believe there's a logical reason for most things to happen or a scientific reason for most things to happen. And I do hold on to some skepticism. But I'm also not going to ridicule or dismiss someone else's experience because it wasn't my experience. Ashley brought up an interesting point that my husband actually also brought up recently, that we as humans are energy, or we hold energy, and energy cannot be created or destroyed. So when we die, where does that energy go? A lot of religions really seek to answer this and claim to have the answer. But the truth is, we don't really know for sure until we die. So if someone wants to use a Ouija board for some answers about life, when there is so much that we don't know, let them. Thank you for listening to the Journalism of Everything podcast. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and also now Substack. If you're looking for more in-depth commentary on this and my other episodes, or are just looking to chat with people who are, honestly, a little more intellectual about things, check out my Substack page. Also, Ashley Inc. has a website. It's dogoodstaybad.com, where you can submit spooky stories. And please check out her TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube channel, all under Ashley Inc. It's ASHLEEINC. Her account is one where I just instantly like whatever it is when something comes up because I know it's going to be really good content. Thanks for listening. And to appease the Ouija board, I say goodbye.